Hi guys, well today I want to talk about some ideas outside of the art world, some ideas that I'm quite passionate about and how they sort of tie into my practice. The first one is aesthetics as a gateway. So what I mean by aesthetics as a gateway is today in contemporary art there's a lot of non-aesthetic focused art. Now the idea behind it might be fantastic, but I personally believe that it's very difficult for members of the public to actually engage with that work. In my work, I try and balance the aesthetic with the contemporary ideology about 50-50. I think that it's important that there is relatability to a work. I think it's important that members of the public identify with your work, that it is indeed artwork. If they get confused with your work and they can't tell if it's trash or if it's highly irritating, I suppose highly irritating is fine, because you're actually prompting some sort of emotional response. But there is a lot of work that does not fit in that criteria, in my opinion. Now, ideas are fundamentally important. I wish to try and change the world in a positive way, and in order to do that, I try and engage with people via my aesthetics as a medium. So even though I've got this great socialistic, moral, utopianistic idea, how on earth do you get to that idea? How on earth do you explain it without some sort of breaking the ice escapade? And for me, I aim to utilise aesthetics in order to do that. Hence the work looks like this. So there is only, within my entire practice, this only makes up a small function of what I do. I, as an artist thinker, try and assimilate a series of information and come up with some sort of judgment about what's going on in the world. And right now we're at kind of a potentially scary place, and I'm going to talk about that in the rest of the video. Point number 2. Now this might seem a bit far off, but I assure you that I'll bring it back round in the end to explain why I'm talking about this. Now, the monetary system was set up originally money was originally set up to assist with agriculture. So in the agricultural revolution, thousands of years ago, they deposited wheat in some sort of granary or an ancient sort of silo, and I believe it was shells that were used as currency. So you would deposit your 500 kilograms of wheat or whatever, get your 5 shells, which represented a kilogram, 100 kilograms each, and then trade them back in as and when you needed the wheat. And this is laid out in Sapiens book. It's a great book by Yuval Noah Harari. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. But yeah, really popular at the moment, and the second book is also out, Homo Deus. That's also where some of the ideas that I talk about today have kind of come from. Those 2 books sort of started this journey about 6 months ago, and I've been researching different areas that it brings up in further detail, such as like European economics and the way that capitalism has actually been warped these days into something that it pretends that it is when it's not. So we'll get to that. Money was set up originally to actually help people, and now money has become an end in itself. It's not actually tied to any currency. It's not actually tied to a set proportion of wheat or a set amount of gold. It's not, and it used to be. It's only recently in capitalist terms that we've moved into a monetary system that isn't tied to a gold standard or some sort of fixed exchange. The actual exchange rates can be changed by the central bank that controls that particular region of finance. And this then becomes slightly problematic when we're championing free market capitalism and trickle-down economics, which for the past 30-40 years, especially since Reagan and Thatcher's era, we've just blindly accepted. And the truth is that it's just not working. The facts say it. The facts support this conclusion. Highly subjective, like for example art. You have to have trust in the teacher to be able to make a judgment on that student. And obviously there are areas where that can be opened up to abuse and to favoritism and a range of other problems. But I'm arguing that perhaps it's in our interest to actually have highly trained professionals in charge of cultivating the minds of young people, because this education system isn't doing that either. we've eroded teachers' status and their pay packets. I mean, I read a lot of the UK news. I mean, I grew up there and I still am in touch with people, and people are so negative about the profession. People are leaving in droves. I mean, in Holland, where I live currently, there's a huge shortage of teachers. There's a huge amount of pressure. Now, that's just from the governmental administrative side of it, the problems that are driving teachers away from actually engaging with the profession. But the actual profession itself is also stagnated. It doesn't take into account the 4 distinct learning varieties: physical, audible, social, or visual. It just expects you to learn in the same way that every other child must learn. There's no sort of flexibility, and there's no assessment of which way particularly suits you or what you're preferred to. And yet, of course, it takes more and more time and effort and actual, perhaps one-on-one teaching. But that's the price that has to be paid. You know, we're not taught how to, our education system teaches us, it's fact-based learning. And we carry around this device in our pockets these days. You know, a push of a button. I know everything. I carry around a calculator. I carry around more power in my pocket than the President of the United States 30 years ago had access to. And that's just mind-boggling when you think this system is not changing when the other systems around us are advancing so quickly. You know, we're not taught how to be happy. We're not taught how to be fulfilled. And that's the true measure of human potential. We talked about money a minute ago, but it doesn't actually take into account, jumping back to money now, it doesn't take into account what's important in life. Now, money isn't the measure of happiness. Happiness is the measure of happiness. And unless we're taught how to be happy in school, unless we're taught what fulfillment is and we understand it and understand how to achieve it, then how can we possibly expect it in the majority of societies in the majority of our lives? I also talked about how this new way of learning, which is much more, you know, one-on-one and actually tailored to each individual's needs, would take up a lot more effort. I know it's easy to continue with a system that's already been in place, and it's really difficult to tear up something that is perceived to be working, but the facts contradict that the system isn't working right now, and before it's too late, I feel like we need to actually engage with this and radically shake up what it is that we're doing in the education system. That, for me, is the fundamental starting point to snowball this kind of, I don't want to call it revolution, but this way of changing. You know, this is about real people's lives, and it's about positivity. And can we just get with the program and not waste our time, you know, with these useless, meaningless assessments, and it leads on to kind of this concept called bullshit jobs, which is where we're doing all these jobs that just aren't necessary. And that brings us to the next point, which is about the implications of artificial intelligence. So with artificial intelligence on the rise, with an actual, when artificial intelligence is truly pervasive, there are multiple different scenarios that can play out. Now, if we just go back to the education for a second, if the artificial intelligence is democratized and it's in fair use for everyone, then you can utilize that extra that technology to actually benefit humanity as a whole, not just for the elite that are currently in control of these sort of areas. We, as a democratic society, currently hold the power of politicians to account, technically. You know, we vote them in, and they are meant to represent our best interests in government. Arguably, that might not be happening anymore, but that's again a debate for another time. We're at a critical point in time, I believe, where right now we do actually hold that power, we do hold that sway. But if we are allowed to continue down the path where elites and corporations actually lobby and are able to manipulate government, which is the elected seat of representation of the people, if they're able to get away with certain things like tax evasion or you know, a number of other examples, then when the rise of artificial intelligence becomes prevalent, whoever technically has the most advanced form of artificial intelligence, if it's withheld and it's a private, if it's privately owned, that corporation or individual is essentially going to become the most powerful, well, person or persons on Earth. And that then causes the distinct possibility of a split in our species, where you end up with some sort of underclass which doesn't have any representational power, because there is no government anymore. It's going to be complete and utter pseudo-democracy if there is, because there is no power. And we've already explained via trickle-down economics that people are greedy. There are inherent flaws with humanity where we look out for number one before anyone else, and I guess that's what makes us human. That potentially is going to be the question we have to answer, whether we're willing to sacrifice our humanity, if that indeed is what makes us human. Because if we choose as an entire species to engage with an advanced AI and we become integrated in a way that we currently can barely imagine, I mean, our sensory input is far faster than our sensory output. We can only type so fast and only speak so fast. But if there is an integrated system, Elon Musk champions this thing called a neural lace, where basically an interface which allows us to integrate our current smartphone technology and whatever artificial intelligence will come later on much more seamlessly, we run the risk of becoming this kind of completely hive-minded species. And, 100 years ago, Orwell predicted 1984, around 100 years ago, and obviously 1984 was written in 1948, but it doesn't... The point that I'm trying to make is, back then it was horrifying to think of a camera in each room, a microphone, a tracking device, and we willingly carry this around with us. We don't realise the scale, I don't think we do, of how we pay for that, through ad revenues, through the actual information that's collected on us and sold to third parties. Look at the scandals that are hitting Facebook and Cambridge Analytica at the moment, not to mention the leaks by Snowden a few years back. Yeah, I mean, those points that were not conceivable rights to be given away back then, we are now conceivably giving them away for free. We're doing it for the convenience of being able to find a close coffee shop or the closest food retail store, or closest retail store, or the closest food market. It's actually such a Faustian bargain when you think about it. I'm saying if we do tick all those boxes and actually achieve a kind of unified humanity, we have to realise that that's the place that we might be going. And at that point we might cease to actually be human, and we're on the cusp of becoming, well, I mean, for want of a better word, gods. I mean, wait, Google defines God as the creator and ruler of the universe and source of all moral authority, a supreme being. And arguably, if we've achieved those steps, we essentially become those things. I just don't think we're actually that far away from that possibility. If you look at where we've come in the last 100 years technologically and follow that gradient, where we're going to go is basically what I'm talking about. So it's quite upsetting when you see people absolutely messing about and deporting immigrants. Look at the Windrush scandal at the moment. What on earth are borders for? If we had open borders, you'd double the economy overnight, and that's again a proven fact. It's not my theory, sorry. It's a well-established theory. But I'm conscious that this video is getting on now, so time for the conclusion. Basically, I feel like we're at a really unique point in time where, depending on the decisions that we as a population make, are going to determine which path humanity kind of goes down in the next century. I feel like we have to be aware and take control of our monetary system, of our educational system, perhaps our political system, but I think that comes as a consequence of the other two. And kind of just get with the program and realizing that we don't need to waste our time on these bullshit jobs. We actually control our own sort of, we control our own lives, and authority is currently from within, not externally. We are the decider of that authority, but we're on the cusp of perhaps, for the first time in a couple of 100 years, actually relinquishing that hard-won democratic freedom. And I suppose I just don't want us to sleepwalk into that. Yeah, let me know what you think, if these ideas are interesting to you, and I'll see you next week for a bit more montage work. Bye.